Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're studying a little late today, but as my pastor used to say, better late than never. Anyways, we're picking up in the 14th chapter of Matthew, where Jesus is walking on the water. We had talked about what a fearsome sight that would be last time. And now Peter, in a moment of boldness, says this in verse 28. And Peter answered him and said, because what did he say before? Be of good cheer, it is I. Be of good cheer, it is I, yeah. Be not afraid. And Peter goes and says, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. I want to walk on the water too. And he said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. And, don't think of a, age of exploration, Christopher Columbus type ship. We're talking about a large boat, but not something that would, that's one of these tall ships. This would be a fishing vessel of the first century. So not a great journey down from the deck. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were coming to the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth thou art the Son of God. And that's the end of that story. So, this is one of my favorite stories of Jesus, because it illuminates certain facts. Peter was the chief of the apostles. He's generally regarded as such, right? The Roman Catholics hold Peter in such high regard that they claim that their Pope is a direct descendant of Peter, because at least spiritually, not carnally. I wish I'd really clean out my glasses. So the idea, so Peter is held, because it is said to him from Jesus. Jesus asked his disciples, saying, Who do men say that I am? And Peter answered, saying, well, one said one thing, one said the other, and then Peter says, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he said, Blessed are your eyes, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And that's an important teaching as well. But, then he goes on to say, And I say unto you that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And people have taken Peter to be the rock. Whereas in my interpretation, it's the statement of faith that Peter made upon which the church is built. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so, in this instance, what I like about this story so much is that Peter's faith, it shows that your faith does not have to be absolute. Peter doubted. He doubted God. It's beautiful when you have faith and doubt not. If you have the faith of a grain of a mustard seed, you could say unto this mountain, and be thou removed and cast in the sea. right? If you have the least amount of faith, it's a dangerous thing. But on the other hand, he chides him, saying, "O ye of little faith." Little faith can be powerful, but it can also get us into trouble when we doubt the Lord. And at least on our own account, not with God, because Jesus stretches forth his hand and takes up the doubting believer. And that is the contradiction of being a Christian, is that the idea of being a doubting believer. That has been something I've suffered with for a long time. And less as I go on, because of the ways in which the Lord has reached out his hand and taken me up. How many times does God have to pull you out of the sea, so to speak, before you start realizing, like, yeah, I don't need to doubt so much? And for me, apparently, it was many times. And I love that analogy of walking on water. I mean, I love to take it as an analogy for things that happen in my life, where I think I'm going through an impossible circumstance, where I can't possibly. This is, I look around me, and sometimes I confess this has been financial for me, because I'm self-employed. The reason I'm starting late today is I just got done with a big job, and I was up late last night, and I knew, I'm like going to bed at 2. I'm like, I'm not getting up at 6 for a Bible study, but I will get up and do a Bible study, because my commitment is to do one every day. And I'm sorry if anyone isn't able to tune in. There's no tuning. When I was a kid, we used to actually tune in the TV. There was a dial, and you had to like fine tune it. That's so funny. Hold on. It's funny to be out of the times, when I was born in 1973, when I was growing up in the 80s, it seemed, looking back, I remember I tell my kids, I'm like, we believed we were living in the future. And it's funny to be here now in the actual future, and how how mundane and simply the same it is. It's quite amazing. But anyways, what I was really talking about was that there have been times where, I was like, I don't have any money, or I had money and I just spent it to pay all the bills, right? But I don't know where the next batch of money is coming from yet. I have no idea. I have no money. Or, I've got a couple $100. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know what's coming next. I don't know. I got no idea. And I began to see it as an analogy of the sea. I look about me and see all these reasons why, things are. My business is going to collapse. My house is going to be auctioned off. All these, I'm going to be foreclosed on, or whatever. They're going to turn off the electricity. I've never had my electricity turned off, but I felt like that's, you'd see these sort of threatening things, like all the circumstances around you tell you danger, be afraid. He saw the wind boisterous. The wind is blowing. It's whipping around, boisterous. It's not just a steady wind. It's like, it's like gusting. The way I take that. They're gusts of wind. I'd be down and out, and then get hit with something extra, and all of a sudden, you start to feel despair, like, this is it, And after being in a number of those circumstances and having the Lord carry you through them. And all of a sudden, something came up. Look at it. We have this new opportunity, and what do you know? Everything worked out all right. That is, how many times does that have to happen before we start saying, I trust the Lord? And I can't say I became fearless, but my fears diminished and my faith increased over time, going through many difficult circumstances. And even having gone through things that were unpleasant. Even being tossed into the sea, finding myself washing up on the shore. Still alive, still in possession of my faith. And that told me that, that God was with me and that I should trust him. I cried out to the Lord in my distress, and he heard me. Peter cried out to the Lord, and the Lord heard him. But I just like the fact that he was doubtful. He started walking on the water. He was doing something amazing. And you think, like, when you start doing something amazing like walking on the water, you think, well, you just know. It's like, well, I started walking on the water. No problem. I'm going to keep walking on the water. And, you think you start off in faith with God that, something happens and you're doing something amazing. You're walking the path of eternal life, and then you start to doubt. It's like, why would you ever doubt? But people do. Peter did. He doubted in the most extreme circumstances, where he had been walking on water. Like, I feel like if I started walking on water, I would believe that I could just keep walking on water. Like, that's how I feel. I'm not, no slap against Peter, right? It's just that, if I got you out on the water and you started walking on water, you would think your tendency would be to continue to believe. But then what if you send, squalls of wind and waves, and it begins to stretch and to pull at your credulity. Can you believe it, really? Are you going to keep walking? And then all of a sudden, if you become conscious of the fact that my walking on the water has something to do with my faith, and you start doubting your faith, and you start sinking a little, pretty soon you start thinking, I'm going to sink a lot. I'm going down. I can't do this. So there's so many times in life when I've said to my wife, I'm like, I feel like I'm walking on the water. Where I feel like I'm in an impossible situation. Where things, and it is a stretch, obviously, but I look around me and every circumstance says you're going down, but I never go down. I've never gone down. The Lord has always upheld me no matter how much the wind howled. Not just financially. There have been other things that all the things that ever came against me. The Lord helped me through them and through it. And I encourage you to have faith that no matter what your circumstance, that the Lord will carry you through. And that doesn't mean it's going to have the outcome you desire. I'm glad. It's not just that I covet my home. My home is much more than, like, if it was just me, I hate speaking it, but I think that like, if I was forced to give it up, then for the Lord's sake, then give it up I must. But it's part of a for me, it was always part of my plan of how to raise my children in a godly fashion, how to educate them without the use of school. It's all part of like a long-term strategy I have. And so, the loss of it would be sort of like a repudiation of my strategy. To have to go live in town and rent or something like that would just be, it would be too much like drowning. I mean, as opposed to coming up alive on the shore. I could come up alive on the shore if all I have to deal with is myself, but I've got other people to care about. Something tastes weird on the edge of that cup. Anyways, it's a beautiful analogy, and there's no bottom to it, and I feel hesitant as I go through it to even move on, because I feel like I just want to talk about walking on the water. Because I feel like I didn't say everything that could be said, or even the majority of things that should be said. Yeah, I gotta just take the lid off. Something happened to my coffee lid, and there's a got like some sort of sweetener on it. And I don't like sweeteners in my coffee. And when the Lord and there's a lot of symbology here, obviously, of the Lord, and the vision of Peter walking on the water with him in the sea and the waves. And then he steps into the ship, the wind just goes away. It's almost like all the trouble that we see around us is the Lord's doing. Like, the wind blows. The Lord is not in it necessarily. Elijah had that vision of, the wind comes and the earthquake comes, and the Lord was not in any of those things. But then there comes the still small voice, and the Lord is in that. And by being in it, though, I guess I think of that in terms of like, a lot of boisterous, troublesome things come at us in life, but it doesn't necessarily mean that God is sending us a message through that. Sometimes it's just part of what we have to go through to get where we're going. Like everything that happens, nose itches. Everything that happens in the world is a result of God's determined counsel and foreknowledge. I believe that. But that does not mean that he is trying to send a particular message with every particular thing that goes on. That's why in Christianity we don't look, we don't have, like the Greeks and stuff, they would look at the flight of birds, or they'd look into the entrails of an animal looking for signs. Some sort of sign of the will of the gods. And that was how they would divine. There was divination. The bird flew. You ask a question, then a bird comes flying out from the right side, and so, the answer is yes. The bird, I mean, just a random bird, not like a particular bird. You see birds flying, and it's sort of like, is Zeus trying to tell me something? But we don't do that. Not every little thing that happens is God trying to send a sign or a signal to us. And I should not go past verse 33 without mentioning, they worshipped him. When they were in the ship, they came and worshipped him, saying, "Of a truth thou art the Son of God." I'm walking on the water is a pretty good sign that someone has the power of God if they're indeed walking on the water. I mean, I've seen ways in which this can be faked, but they were out in the middle of the sea. This wasn't like they were near the shore and he kind of walked out on the submerged platform. I remember someone talked about, they talk about miracles being impossible because they break the laws of physics or something like that, which is total nonsense, because there are no laws of physics. They're only just basic operating conventions. Like what makes something like a law? It's a law. Well, it's a law. Gravitation, it's a law. It's an unbreakable law. Like, they use the language of morality. Like, you can't break these laws. They govern everything. They do. They're just observational. They're basically consistent observational truths. Meaning you observe over and over again, and then you call it a law. But there's no evidence that it is a law. And there's no evidence that that says, I mean, you could take it as evidence of law, but there's no conclusive proof that it's law, like physics and all that stuff. What it is, well, and also this is that, you don't know the substructure of on which that is based, like the underpinning laws that the laws, quote unquote, are based on, meaning the substructure of reality. I mean, we have a perceptual reality which human beings have access to. Our sight, our sound, our brains can interact with the world. We can even interact with ideas, things that have no material existence. We can interact on all those levels, and that's amazing. But that is not to say there are not deeper levels with which we cannot interact. And that's something I've talked about before when I talk about the nature of supernature, of the overarching nature. And the suspension of what we consider to be laws, or what seems to be the suspension of laws, or the seeming breaking of laws. It's not, the reason I put it in air quotes is there is no breaking of that which is not a binding. And it's just merely accessing greater laws, overarching laws. What truly governs one's position in space? Is it gravity? I mean, can one have a position in space without regard to gravity? Must all objects constantly interact with gravity? Or, can, so anyways, like the way in which Jesus overcomes the normal function of the world as we know it is not material, because we don't know. We don't know. Was there something about surface tension? Was it merely just, I don't know. I have no idea how he walked on water. But the idea that it's somehow impossible because we can't do it is not a significant point. All right, we're halfway through. Let's talk about subscription. It's it's free. You can just subscribe on YouTube. You can click on the like button. That doesn't cost you anything either. unless it could cost you if you are if you hang out with a lot of unbelievers, and they saw that this video was in your liked videos. There's an option in YouTube to hide your liked videos. You don't have to share them with everybody. One time, someone was very critical of me on my other channel, and I wanted to see what they were all about. And they weren't hiding all the videos they liked. And send your questions to questions@oraclesofgod.org. All this is linked in the description below. This dude was not hiding what he watched. And I only do it because, whatever. It's like I take a lot of... If I wanted to look at stuff I didn't want to see, I sure as heck wouldn't. I didn't want other people to see. I wouldn't do it on my YouTube account, all right? Just to be truthful. But anyways, the Lord sees all, right? But this guy was just showing the world everything he was up to. And that included, a lot of... Apparently he liked seeing women shake their bottoms. That was something. He had quite a number of videos of bottom shaking videos, which I'm like, okay, well, I can't even look at your channel anymore, lest I seem to be doing something I have no intention of doing. So you don't have to let the world know you like my videos. You just can not display your liked videos or watched videos. But you have to look out those settings on YouTube. They worshipped him. They worshipped the Lord. Jesus accepted worship. He did not forbid it. In the book of Revelation, when the Revelator, John, he falls down at the feet of the angel that shows him things and begins to worship. And the angel is very explicit, saying, don't do this. Worship God. Worship is reserved only for God. The first commandment says, you will have no other gods before me. You will not worship other gods. And this is why Christians consider Jesus to be God and not some other God. That's why we still believe in one God. Now, God manifests in three persons, but yet in essence one. And that is somewhat paradoxical because in nature there are no analogs to that type of a thing. But with God, all things are possible. If he wanted to, and this will offend some people, I suppose, but God could manifest himself, or he could have been manifest, let's say, in even more persons. But he has not revealed himself in more persons. He has revealed himself in three. And that's the important thing. So we don't know the extent of God's reality, and therefore we should not try to put him in a box. But when we say he has revealed himself as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that is the truth. That is how he has revealed himself. And he is one. One essence, one being, God, manifest in three persons. And by persons, we do not mean beings. We mean that each of these persons has the ability to interact with one another and have a relationship with one another, and is shown as distinct in the scriptures. Clear something. Anyways, I'm not going to go into a deep explanation of the Trinity, but Jesus accepts worship. It's interesting to me. You think about this, that from Christianity, you have sects that branch off, that both, on one hand, will deny the divinity of Christ, and then on the other hand, those who will say there is no distinction between him and God the Father. I mean, think about it. I have associations with both of those groups, And they're polar opposites. One that says, no, he is definitely not the same as God the Father. He is, in fact, so distinct from God the Father that he is a created thing. He had a beginning. He has a father, Whereas in the Trinitarian position, the Father role is indeed a role, but there is a being, not just a being, not fully a being, but a person behind it. And some people could mock and say, like, well, I see you struggling with this, Paul. Well, it's not an easy subject. I've dealt with the scriptures for over 20 years, and I was not, when I was a youth, before I started studying the scriptures, when I was a Christian, though, and I believed I was a Trinitarian. And in fact, when I listened to Arnold Murray, I thought I was a Trinitarian, even though he was not. And even though my views were not Trinitarian at all, they were more modalistic. There was more of the idea that Jesus was the Father. That there was not a distinct Father and a distinct Son. That they were pretty much the same, and they were just roles that the one God was playing. But I thought that was the Trinity because I didn't understand what the Trinity was. There was a lot of people peddling a lot of confusion about it. But, it's not just the Christian label for what God is. It actually has a substantive meaning, and you can't just assign any meaning to it. You can't just be like, well, to me, the Trinity is this. It's like water. It's solid, liquid, and gas. And no. That is not the Trinity. That's another doctrine. And so, it's fine to adhere to it. Well, I'd prefer people understood what they were talking about instead of just blindly adhering to the Trinity. For a long time, that was my objection to the Trinity, is that, like, I object to it on principle. I objected it to the idea of the Trinity on principle because so many people did not know what they were talking about. I was like, this has now lost all meaning. Because for most people who I talk to, while they will reflexively defend the word Trinity, they had no idea what the Trinity was. There's a historical doctrine. It's not something you can just make up. You either understand what it was in the beginning and what it continues to be to this day, or you're contributing to the confusion. It's one or the other. You're either contributing to the confusion or you understand what you're talking about. And that's one of the things I didn't like about the Trinity, because I thought so many people are just contributing to the confusion because they're saying, I'm a Trinitarian, solid, liquid, gas. And that's not what it's like. That's not the teaching. So, and I have several on my website, oraclesofgod.org, linked in the description below. I have several studies, and some of which are correct, where I was still denying the Trinity, and I said where basically I objected to it on principle. And that was the principle I objected to it on, was that, and you don't have to adhere to that label. Like for a long time I said, like my beliefs are essentially identical with Trinitarian beliefs. I realized that at some point. I'm like, actually what I believe is what the Trinitarians believe. I just don't want to call myself a Trinitarian. Well, after a while I thought, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like when I wanted to say, in my youth I used to say, I'm not religious. I'm not religious. What a stupid thing to say. I'm spiritual. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to mock those who still do that. But I see myself as a joke in my youth saying, well, I'm not religious. Religious to me is people doing, because I saw negativity directed towards religiousness, so I didn't want to identify myself with it. Instead of defending religiosity, which is more helpful, actually, saying, no, you ought to be religious, if you use it properly and in a good way. I'm religious. How could I deny it? as I sit here teaching the Bible, talking about God. Oh, but I'm not these negative things. It's like, well, then you have to define your religion. There's all kinds of religion. Even human beings who don't believe in God have forms of religion. It's so powerful and so subversive that they don't even want to acknowledge it at times. But they have the form of religion. They have the mentality of religion. And they want to, but they want to separate themselves from that. I do not seek to separate myself from the idea of religion. I want to bind all men to it and show them I would rather show them their religious. I'd rather prove, because as soon as you start swearing off religion, you replace it with something that's like religion. And maybe it's ideology. But there's some irrational belief system that gets implanted, because you have to have some sort of worldview. You can't have just like, I got nothing. Everyone puts in something. And if they say there is nothing, then, you might be mentally ill. Because that's how fundamental it is to the human mind. Jesus accepted worship because it was appropriate as the Son of God. As the Pharisees say, by claiming to be the Son of God, they saw it as a claim to be equal with God. They understood what it meant to be the Son of God. Because otherwise, I'm the Son of God, you're the Son. We're all the sons of God. Not in that special sense, but only in a adoptive sense, in a metaphorical sense, in some other sense, but not in the sense that Jesus was the Son of God. So they cross over the sea and come to the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place had knowledge of him, they sent out into all that country round about, and brought unto him all that were diseased, and besought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment, and as many as touched were made perfectly whole. So there was a lot of faith in that place. Gennesaret, they heard, so that they just thought, if I could just touch his garment, I would be whole. And it's not that his garment was special, but they knew that he was special. And as Jesus often says, their faith makes them whole. Meaning that God was responding to their belief in him, in the Son of God, in his healing of them. And we come to chapter 15. But there's symbolism that hem of the garment. The very border, and it goes. It's an analogy. It's an interesting analogy in this sense, because the border is what? The edge, the very outermost part. And you have one example there of Peter walking on the water, doing something amazing, but having little faith and sinking. And then here we have people having faith in a very little thing. Like Peter was going to walk on, and poor Peter, always being the example of denying the Lord. He that denies me before men will I deny before my Father. And then Peter gets to be the exception. So that we know there are exceptions. You have Peter doing this great walking on water, and his faith isn't strong enough. Now you have them, if I could just barely touch his garment. I just touch the very edge of his garment. Just get the very edge of his existence, if I could just put my fingers on it. The very least thing. Walking on water, touching his garment. How opposite could you get? Touching the garment of the Lord, walking on the water. It's just a huge disparity. in the act that they're taking up. You know what I mean? Like Peter in faith stepping out on water to walk, the sea and the waves roaring about him, all boisterous, the wind. And here we have people just coming up and touching him. But on one hand, you know, and in a sense, you could see both in terms of little faith. I have a faith that if I touch the littlest part of him, I can have the greatest work done in me. If I can just get the least little grab on his garment, just touch the very edge of his existence, of the existence of God, I can have this thing. And then Peter, right at the center of existence, right there. Let me walk on the water with you. How intimate with God. You know what I mean? And you see that intimate thing of God is walking on the water and Peter steps out on the water to walk with him. And then you have this picture of him walking through this country and all these people trying to be healed, and they just touch the edge. And I think that's an interesting contrast. How, you know, faith in a little thing, great faith in something small, can be more effective than a little faith in something big. A little faith in something big can, you know, we can doubt and we can start to sink. And we need God's help. But with great faith, we can just touch the margin of his outer garment and have the greatest works we need done in our lives done. So we want to build up our faith. We want to have, you know, Peter has shown on numerous occasions the limits of God's mercy, which are quite generous. You know, God is merciful to those that love him and who make mistakes. You know, Peter denied the Lord. Peter was out on the water. He doubted. He is merciful because Peter loved the Lord a lot, but he was like you and me. I mean, he was flawed, you know, and that's good. I'm glad. I love Peter is probably my favorite apostle. You know, I mean, Paul is. I was named after the Apostle Paul consciously, not just like I like the name Paul. My father named me after the apostle. And of course I love the Apostle Paul. But among the disciples in the Gospels, Peter's got to be the favorite, Peter and Thomas, for me, because they demonstrate the Lord's mercy to those who do indeed love and believe in him, but experience doubt and failure, and it is a great comfort. We don't want to abandon our faith when tribulation or persecution arises. But Peter showed us that momentary lapses can be forgiven, even though I would not lapse knowing or thinking, oh, I'll be forgiven. Peter didn't think that. When Peter denied the Lord, the full horror of that situation was upon him. He went out and wept bitterly. He thought he was done. He wasn't able to, you know, because he thought his place was to die with the Lord. You know, that was what he believed. And by failing to stick with him through the trial, he saw himself as having just utterly failed in his zeal for the Lord. You know, like, you know, they're stoning Christians outside, and you slink away. But you know your place is with them. And it's not necessarily true, though. It's like, you know, Peter's place wasn't to die with the Lord, but he had set himself up, you know, by building himself up. Like, I'll die with you. I'll go with you to whatever the circumstances are. I'll be there. All right, chapter 15. You got a good 10 minutes to talk about this. Oh, yes, I love chapter 15. I didn't look ahead. But like I said, I was up late finishing up a job and starting this late, and this is sometimes it's fun just to be surprised. What's next? As I'm familiar with all these stories, it's so wonderful to go over them again. You know, I love teaching the Gospels. Matthew 15:1. Then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, Why do thy disciples transgress the Sorry. Should I do that voice or not? Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. If I click away from that window, it just, boom, gone. They don't wash their hands. But he answered and said unto them, Why do ye also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, Whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, It is a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, This people draweth nigh me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Isaiah chapter 29. I forget the exact verse. It's all right. Just 29 of Isaiah. I have a song for that on oraclesofgod.org. Go to the music page, or the songs page. I think I don't call it music page. It's songs page. And you'll find Isaiah 29 there. It was on the first album I ever produced. But there's also a live version. Did I release my live album? I don't remember. We won't get to verse 10. That's ambitious. In fact, I feel like this whole section is ambitious. So, what they're referring to is the ritualistic washing. And Jesus goes on in this chapter to talk about it. That you have a lot of these traditions that just are, before you eat, you got to wash, the ceremonial washing, and this is what and this is seen as godly. It'd be like me going with a bunch of evangelicals, let's say, and I've been party to evangelical circles, and I love evangelicals. I do. I love their faith and all that. I mean, I'm not a fundamentalist, but I love them all. I have good friends that are fundamentalists who I love, okay? But I just disagree with them on the way they interpret the scriptures. And, I don't have any family members, though, to tell you the truth. So well, actually, I do have family members, but they're, I don't know if I'd call them proper fundamentalists. But, like if I was to go into, I remember when I used to be part of these, college fellowship groups with Christians, and one of the things that always used to bug me is like the long prayers, little prayer circles. We'd all gather in a circle and hold hands, and everyone was supposed to pray. And I felt this peer pressure. I ignored it because I was, whenever I felt in my life pressured by peers, because I kind of grew up feeling like an outcast. I don't know if I actually was. I moved at a certain time in life, and I was a new person, and so I didn't feel part of the group, and that feeling of outsiderness did not fade for years. And so I have a distinctive experience of feeling like outside of the mainstream for a large portion of my life. And many people do that also. But anyways, I didn't feel pressured personally. Well, but I felt the pressure. I mean, I knew there was pressure. And it felt like, make a long and interesting prayer. When you pray about specific things and be real specific about, Lord, help Johnny find his lost dog and whatever. That's a silly thing I just thought of off the top of my head. But they do these long prayers where they talk about just things. They just keep talking and talking and talking. And I always found it just tedious. I mean, I'm sitting there holding hands with people, and they're just praying tediously a long prayer. And, you can't, it's like, you can't go, would you hurry up? And it seems rude, irreverent even. Maybe even, like something wrong with you, Paul, because you're not like just listening to this long prayer. And I don't think they were making it for pretense, but who knows? I mean, maybe there were some pretentious prayers going on. I don't know how I would tell the difference. I'm not God. But the thing is, in those situations, you're tempting people to make pretentious prayers. You're tempting them to make a long prayer to be seen of the group. Let's all hold hands where each of us are going to pray. And each of us are going to have something interesting to say. They don't say that. But I mean, that's how it feels. It's like, I'll go first. Who wants to go first? I'll go first because that's the pole position. You want to go first because you start praying. You can cover all these subjects and leave everyone with scraps, So you can say like, and then they just end up repeating you. And sometimes they just would. They would just they would pray the same things in different words. And I understand the exercise of let's pray together. There are times to pray together, but oftentimes I would just pray a single sentence. I'd be like, I'm going to be the hero of this circle and move this circle along. I don't need to repeat the same words. I'm in agreement with all these people. All right, I agree. Yes. Help Johnny. Help Susie. Help Mary. Help Freddie. Yes. And but I wouldn't even say, I'd be like, Lord, you've heard all our prayers. Blah, 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 blah. Thank you for answering them, etc. We know you're attentive to our voice. But if I were to do that and they were to be like, you didn't make the prayer right. Or let's say I just prayed some, like in that circle, if I were to just whip out the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. As to them it would seem offensive that I just prayed the Lord's Prayer. Or I wouldn't pray the Hail Mary. But what I'm saying is like I've been called upon without my consent to pray at like family gatherings, and I don't like to be put on the spot like that. And if it's before a meal, sometimes I just whip out traditional Catholic pre-meal blessing. And because that's how I was raised. But it's like, and I wasn't raised particularly Catholic, but we prayed that it's a Catholic thing. Nothing wrong with it though. It didn't say "Hail the Pope" in there somewhere, And but if I were to pull out this sort of rude traditional prayer in the midst of, and I call it rude, I mean like rudimentary. Okay, it's very rudimentary. It's very simple. In the midst of all this complex, heartfelt, they might look at me and say, like, you're not praying right. Am I? Not? At times I felt like there was a little bit of that, okay? A little bit. No one ever said anything, but like if they did say something, that'd be kind of like what the Pharisees are doing to the disciples here. You're not washing your hands right. That's how ridiculous they are. They're transgressing the traditions of the elders. Or if as a evangelical you went into a Catholic circle and you prayed for, you said grace over a meal and it was something evangelical and they took offense. Oh, this is not how you say grace. This is not how you prepare to eat. They had a ritual. Like, why do they not follow the traditions of the elders? They held their elders in a lot of reverence. The way they said things ought to be done. This is what you do before because it's not just that their hands are dirty. You know what I mean? It's that they're defiled. You know what I mean? And what the washing they're talking about is not trying to wash dirt off. You know what I mean? Like, you've got hands covered with crap. Why are you eating food? Even they understood that you shouldn't, handle dog feces one moment, not that I would, I was rolling dung balls, and then now I'm going to go eat. I think they would have understood, like, I don't want flakes of dog dung in my food, so they would wash their hands, but they didn't purify their hands. They didn't ritually make them holy. If I'm going to take in food, I need to ritually cleanse my hands in a special washing. Wash, whatever. There was a purification washing they're talking about. At least that's the way I understood this. It doesn't mean like they've got crud all. Their hands are covered with sand. Why are you eating a sandwich when your hands are covered with? You're going to have grit in your teeth. Wash your hands. No, that's not what they're worried about. They don't wash their hands properly. And what he says, and what we'll cover next time, is why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? And we'll talk about this: honor your father and your mother. Meaning, they had traditions which were transgressions of God's commandments. And it goes to the spirit of the law. Like basically the law says one thing, but they would find a loophole. And they would try to find a way to get around the commandment of God. The commandment of God says, honor your father and your mother. I was like, well, what if I don't want to, what if I've got some money and I don't want to use it on my mom and dad who are in need? And that's what this bit about the gift is. The word gift is korban. It is dedicated. It is a gift. It is korban in the Hebrew, or in the Aramaic actually. It is something that I've consecrated to God. So if you have something consecrated, you can't use that to help your mother and your father. So they would find these technicalities by which you could avoid honoring the commandments of God. Just like it's like, well, it's not adultery to just look at a woman. It's not a adultery to look at her and kind of want her. It isn't adultery to start playing with yourself. That's all fine. And that's what they do, is they look at the law and they start finding ways to transgress the law by going around it. And then justifying themselves. Because they don't say, no, I'm not going around the law. I'm obedient to the law. It's just that there's exceptions. And the thing is, there are exceptions to things. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Is it ever okay to steal? Well, you can steal men's hearts. You can put ideas to death. And certainly the book of Ecclesiastes says there's a time to kill and a time to time to make war and a time for peace. The Lord himself. And there's a day of judgment in which the heavens will burn. We're going to be set on fire. and men will be burned and destroyed. So yeah, there's a time to kill. For the judge. So, I mean, but we, in attempting to go around these things, should be very careful that we do not violate the spirit in which it is said. Like, I can talk all day about, like, it's foolish to do something like this, you know, but if I'm not speaking with, because, you know, like, oh, whoever shall say thou fool, you could just say, like, well, you never say the word fool ever, but you can totally call him an idiot, right? You can totally call him a moron, even though the Greek word is moros. That doesn't work very well. You know, Jesus said, don't call a guy a fool or a moron, but you can call him a schmuck or a, I don't know why all of a sudden these Yiddish words, or a schlemiel. I don't even know what those words mean. You call them other names, it's fine. You know, it's perfectly acceptable. Just don't call people fool. Well, no. You can say, the Bible says, calls things foolish. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. But I do not speak contemptuously of another man under any circumstances, but I can speak of the actions of men in terms of foolishness. It's a foolish thing to do. It's about what we have going on. It's about heart issues. In fact, that comes up in the. Remember, we didn't read it. One of my favorite verses, you know. The things going, you know. The things that go into the mouth do not defile, but that which comes out of the mouth. As he says in Mark, for out of the heart proceeds murders, violence, fornication, wickedness. These things defile you, not the things that go into your mouth, not the things you take in. So we're going to cover this a little more in depth tomorrow. Anyways, so that's it for today. Thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to studying with you again real soon. Tomorrow, after a great night's sleep tonight, and a nice early study tomorrow. Let's just pick our song.